at the Magi and comparing them to Herod's advice was quite a character. He made anyone you can think ambitious look like maybe Alan Sugar I was thinking of, or Dragon's Den. He made them look like pussycats. And you may think that sounds a bit over the top, but he was willing to kill, and did kill, arrange the murder of his two sons just to protect his position on the throne. What an incredible tyrant he was. That's an understatement. But before we think about that, I really want to focus on the encouragement of the scriptures, because we see the scriptures and we can often think they're like, especially around Christmas, can't we? We can think they're fairy tale like, but as we saw, they do have external sources. First of all, prophecy from the Old Testament throughout this, but more than that, actually, it's the history there is verified by a secular writer called Josephus, who we may know about, a Jewish historian who wasn't a believer, but he did write a secular history of the Jewish people, and so we really can get confidence. And he mentioned not the whole story, but he talked about Herod at length, and that's how we know what type of character he was. So we can gain great confidence from the scriptures. We can see the nativity story, and it can be portrayed as a bit of a fairy tale, but it's rooted in history. What good news that is, just like the rest of the Bible and the Gospels. Just some side points to start off with, which really struck me. Number one is the awesomeness of Jesus. Just when you think about it, we're used to the story, aren't we? But his birth was heralded by a heavenly sign, the star, and his death was heralded by a heavenly sign when the sun went dark. This was no ordinary person. The Bible is full of great people, but nothing quite like this, nothing quite like Jesus. Signs in the heavens at his birth and his death. Jesus is truly awesome. And secondly, just the sacrifice of Jesus, the fact we often say, don't we, he was willing to come from heaven to earth. What a thing that is to do. But when you realize he came to a place of great danger, where a king was ruling, where he was willing to kill children up to 2 years old, just in total carnage, and yet Jesus was prepared to do that, to leave his safety and do that, is quite something, because he preferred to bear the cost of our rebellion rather than us. He was willing to risk all for that. And it's more than just coming from heaven to earth, but coming to just a place on earth which was full of danger and risk. Jesus is awesome in who he was and his sacrifice. Thank you, Lord Jesus. But yes, Herod was an incredibly ambitious man and brutal man, and Jesus disrupted him and disturbed his plans, absolutely, and disturbed all the people in Jerusalem, actually. Jesus is one who disturbs, and I've often bore my children with many quotes, and one of them they can finish before I've finished it, and it's Jesus came to comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. And certainly Herod was one who was pretty comfortable and needed disturbing. And I would put myself in that same category as well. Someone who is pretty comfortable and needs disturbing. And Jesus has certainly done that in my life. And I'm sure that I'm very confident he's willing to do that all the more. But what I wanted to do is compare. I was really intrigued by the chief priests and the teachers of the law compared to the Magi. The chief priests and the teachers of the law had accurate knowledge of the scriptures. They were established, had good reputation. They had influence, and they were in a safe position. How different from the Magi? The Magi came from the east. It says they think it's from Arabia. They weren't actually. They came from a different religion. but they did have some fragments of belief, as we can see from what they said. They had minimal knowledge, less understanding. They were outsiders. They had everything against them in comparison to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. But they did have one thing over the religious teachers. They had a heart to seek. While the Magi seeking led them on a dangerous adventure, the religious were safely nearby, largely oblivious to the amazing things that God was doing. And it makes me think about my struggle as a Christian. I've been a Christian 26 years. And the truth is, I do want to play a significant part in God's kingdom, like the Magi. But I also want a nice religious life, which is comfortable and not to be disrupted by God, like the chief priest and the teacher of the law. Can you relate? But my experience is I do need to shift from being merely a believer to being a wholehearted seeker. And that term wholehearted makes me feel weak, because I know that God is wanting my all. What I want to do is think about the difference between believers and seekers today, and encourage myself to move on from not merely being a believer, but a seeker. I think there's 3 telltale signs we can learn from this about whether we are merely believers or seekers. And I think it's the comparison of those two groups, the Magi and the religious teachers of the law. It was routine or unusual. What is our experience of God and our lives? Is it routine or unusual? That's number 1. Are we seeking merely contentment or joy? That's number 2. And are we looking for safety or encountering danger? That's number 3. So, routine versus unusual. I'm thinking of these scriptures here, verses 7 to 9. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until they stopped over the place where the child was. What an incredible adventure the Magi were on. They came a long, long way to come for this, to come for this moment. There were all these people in Jerusalem, these believers who were in Jerusalem, and just Bethlehem isn't far away from Jerusalem, and yet it wasn't for them. This experience wasn't for them. They were safely in Jerusalem, but the Magi had come from a long way, and they were blessed with this incredible experience, this very unusual experience. They weren't just satisfied staying back in Arabia with their routine. They had read some scriptures and came to believe that incredible things were happening, and were willing to go out of their way to do an unusual thing, to seek what God was doing, to seek this new the King of the Jews. I can't imagine that their wives and their family thought this was a normal thing to do, just to go off and do that. Why would you want to do that? They could have stayed at home and done the routine, usual thing, but they risked the unusual, the surprising, for the sake of seeking the truth. Thinking of our good friends Grant and Shailene. Meet up with Grant Saturday mornings with the Saturday morning guys, still on Zoom. We've had the routine of meeting together since lockdown every Saturday, which has been wonderful. But Grant joins us there, and for those of you who don't know, they've gone to Bolton. They've done the unusual, haven't they? They've broken out of the routine, and they've done the unusual. So much so the locals don't really understand why they've done that. They don't understand why they've gone from Bolton, from leafy Surrey up to Bolton. They're setting up running, and they've gone through tough times. Shailene wanted to get a job. She's just got a job now. So that's been quite a time, hasn't it? It's been a tough time. They've been going there in COVID, in lockdown. And of course, the North has had more of a lockdown than the South, but they've had a tough time. But they've just got a job, but they're comforted by the fact. I know that Grant said it's tough, but he says, I believe this is where God wants us to be. They're doing the usual rather than the routine. Setting up running clubs. And they said they've never had things like that before on their estate. Having alpha courses, and people have loved the alpha course so much. They finished the alpha course, they don't want it to finish. And they said, can we carry on meeting after Christmas? And so isn't that wonderful? That through doing the unusual, which people weren't expecting, they are finding needs and having impact. I'm so challenged by this quote. It isn't biblical, it's just a business quote. If I'm not willing to risk the unusual, I'll have to settle for the ordinary. I may have shared this before. If I'm not willing to risk the unusual, I will have to settle for the ordinary. The Magi risked the unusual. What about me? Am I settling for the ordinary, the routine? I can settle for the ordinary, that's the truth. I can settle for the ordinary, but there's one problem. If I'm just willing to have the ordinary, safe, comfortable life of a regular believer, I can do that, but it will mean my impact will be limited. I reap what I sow. If I seek a life of comfort and safety, I will have minimal impact, unlike Grant and Shailene. So that's routine. Is my life routine, or is there something about it which is unusual? People don't really totally understand. That's a challenge to my heart and to me. Secondly, am I seeking contentment or joy? This was obviously, we know that the time this was set, but 30 years later, Jesus would tell his listeners another story. The man Jesus, rather than the child Jesus, would tell his listeners another story, a story about a seeker. Like the Magi. Matthew 13:44 says, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field. He left, after his discovery, he went in joy and sold all he had and bought that field. Joy was accompanied with his discovery of this seeker. And the Magi were full of joy too. There's a parallel here. In Matthew 2:10, it tells us, when they saw the star, they were overjoyed. God has a joy waiting for us, so much better than contentment. But like the treasure finder, true profound joy requires me to give up my ambition. My ambition, not like Herod's ambition to be crazed in wanting to keep power, I would think. Not particularly like Alan Sugar or Dragon's Den. My ambition is to have a pleasant middle-class life. But the treasure seeker that Jesus talked about sold all he had. He was sold out. That challenges me so much. He was sold out for what he had found, for the kingdom of heaven. He was sold out, am I? And again, I don't need to be sold out for God. I don't need to be. But the cost is I will not experience in this life the joy that God has waiting for me. And in the next life, I don't need to be sold out for him, but in the next life, scripture tells me that if I'm lukewarm, God will spit me out of my mouth in Revelation. So I do have the choice, but God is very clear. He wants us to be hot. He prefers us to be cold, actually, rather than lukewarm, which is such a temptation to me. About 12 months ago, Vishal, if I know quite a few of us know Vishal, not everyone, but quite a few of us have had the pleasure of meeting Vishal. He was baptized 18 months ago at RBC. An Indian, about 35-year-old guy, 36, 37, and was from a Hindu background and was a seeker of Jesus and got baptized at RBC. But about 12 months ago, Vishal was sharing his faith with his Hindu cousin Ankush, and immediately got rebuked by him for being taken in by Christianity. Ankush, I've got a slide here which I'd like to show, but probably technology is too much for me. We've got a picture of Ankush. That was this time last year, so about December last year. This September, we've got another picture of Ankush. There he is in a pool of water, ready to be baptized. He got baptized this September. How wonderful. See, Ankush, I think, is like the Magi. He's from a different religion, like the Magi. Low knowledge, like the Magi. But he is a seeker. He is a seeker of God. And God has blessed him with a great adventure. Since then, Ankush has been studying the scriptures with Vishal's brothers in India, totally out of his comfort zone. He was very fearful before he was doing it, and understandably so. But afterwards, he was laughing and full of joy at the adventures and scrapes he is having. Not like the religious, safe in Jerusalem, more like the Magi on an adventure and having scrapes. And you know, those people, the sort of impact he's having as well, because he's willing to do that, is Vishal's family in India. Now they're not celebrating Diwali, which is a false god ceremony, and they're throwing away their idols. How wonderful. The impact a young believer is having with minimal knowledge, but he is a seeker. He is a seeker, and boy, God is giving him an adventure and a journey he's on. I believe all of us want that sort of joy and impact. And the good news is it is available for all of us if we choose not to be merely religious believers, but be an adventurous seeker like Ankush. How much more wonderful to have this sort of joy than settle for mere contentment. So that's number 2, joy or contentment or joy. Number 3, safe or dangerous. And verse 12, it says, and having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. The Magi left their safe situations back in Arabia and got themselves into hot water and awkward situations. You know, I've mentioned this before, just January, just before lockdown, I asked 2 college pals. So they've known these guys 35 years, real good friends. Hey, I've got this biography of Jesus, interested in looking at them. And it's just this Uncover book that I've got here, which I've shared quite a few times. We've been looking through various people. Would you be interested in looking at them? So they said yes. Once every 2 weeks, we get together Thursday with a Zoom call. And, you know, every time I feel awkward. I feel like I'm in hot water and it feels a bit dangerous and not safe, because I fear that rejection and I fear them saying, no, they don't want to do this. But both of them since then have got COVID, but we had a bit of a break and we've got back, and to my total delight, they're still doing this. It isn't, you know, we go for about half an hour on Thursdays with Zoom, but I've had very awkward conversations with them because the scriptures and God has been working in their hearts. With Kev, we've looked at scriptures, and it was clear to him through these awkward situations, these dangerous situations. We're used to safe relationship, but this is dangerous. And he clarified to himself, he was wondering if his friends were lost, and he could see from the scriptures very clearly they were. But then he said, more of a concern for me, what about my wife and children? They're lost. I'm concerned about their lostness too. That in 30 years, that is the toughest, most awkward conversation I've had with him. And all I could say was, well, let's keep on meeting together, look at scriptures, and you'll be in a better position to help them, won't you? Very awkward, dangerous situation. My other pal, John, he believes even less. But at the end of when we went through, after about 6 months, we got through 6 studies of the Gospel of John. I asked him this very basic question: is what we have read believable? Again, it was a dangerous question to a non-believer. And there was a very uncomfortable, pregnant silence. 4, 5, 6 seconds went by. And he knew he couldn't honestly say no, because it was believable. What we'd read, the Gospels are believable. He couldn't say no, but he couldn't say yes either. The implications were too huge. All he could scramble out of his mouth was, "I've really enjoyed going through the Gospel of John. Can we continue with another Gospel?" I was so delighted that he said that. Awkward conversations. Both of these guys aren't interested in coming to church, but they are interested in the truth of God. I believe we all have Kevs and Johns in our lives. But every Thursday evening, my heart is pounding. What will Jesus unveil this week? What an adventure. I never don't feel awkward, and I never don't feel totally thrilled afterwards. It's dangerous. Just 3 evenings ago, we had a Zoom meeting, and we were looking at Luke now, looking at the prodigal son. We're having, tough conversations about the relationships we had with our fathers and the relationship we have with our sons. Tough, dangerous, awkward, and wonderful. My default is for my walk with God to be routine and safe, like the religious scribes and teachers of the law in Jerusalem. Yet Jesus has an adventure of the unusual, the joyful, and dangerous journey, just like the Magi, waiting for me if I want it. The good news is, if you sense your walk is routine and safe, Jesus has the adventure of the unusual, the joyful, and the dangerous waiting for you too. And the great news is it can start today. But the question is, are we willing to break out of our usual routines and risk the unusual, just like the Magi? Thank you for listening.